The US government owes $36 trillion. Every year we pay over $1 trillion in interest on that debt. Here's the part that makes no sense. The Federal Reserve, the institution we pay that interest to, created the money by typing numbers into a computer. No gold moved, no assets sold. They just credited an account. They create money from nothing. So here's the question. If the Fed created that money from nothing, who do they owe it to? Here's the answer. No one. The Federal Reserve owes that money to no one. There was no lender. There was no loan. They simply created it. But here's where it gets strange. Even though the Fed owes nothing, the US government owes the Fed with interest. Think about what that means. A debt with no creditor, money created from nothing, owed to no one but the government, and your tax dollars pay interest on it anyway. Over $1 trillion a year. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how this works, how money gets created, who profits, why this is mathematically impossible to sustain, and why this exact pattern destroyed Rome, Spain, and Britain. Before we go deeper, comment below, did this just break your brain? Where are you watching from? Hit subscribe, because once you understand this mechanism, you'll never look at a dollar the same way. Let's start with what a note actually is. When you borrow money from a bank, you sign a promissory note. You promise to pay back the loan with interest. You owe the bank. The bank is the creditor. That's how debt works. Borrower and lender. Now look at a dollar bill. Federal Reserve note. It's a note, a debt instrument. But who's the borrower? Who's the lender? Most people assume the government borrowed it and someone lent it. That's partially true. The government did borrow it. But here's the twist. The entity they borrowed from, the Federal Reserve, didn't have the money to lend. The Fed created it at the moment of lending. In normal debt, lender has money, lends it, borrower owes them. In Federal Reserve debt, lender has nothing, creates money, borrower owes them. This breaks the basic logic of debt, and it's completely legal. Let me show you exactly how it works. In 1910, 7 men met in secret on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. J.P. Morgan, a Rockefeller representative, a Rothschild representative, Paul Warburg. They represented 1/4 of the world's wealth. They spent 9 days designing a new monetary system for America. What they created was elegant in its deception. They called it the Federal Reserve System. Federal sounded like government. Reserve sounded like there was gold backing the money. Neither was true. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It's a private institution owned by banks. There is no reserve. The money is created digitally with no backing. But the name worked. In 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. Late at night, December 23rd. Most members had left for Christmas. President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law. He would later write, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit." What had he done? He'd given private banks the power to create the nation's money supply and to charge the government interest on money created from nothing. Before 1913, this couldn't happen. Lincoln had issued greenbacks during the Civil War. Government money, no debt, no interest. The banks despised it. The London Times wrote in 1865, "If this mischievous financial policy should become permanent, then that government will furnish its own money without cost. It will become prosperous without precedent in the history of the world. The brains and wealth of all countries will go to North America. That government must be destroyed or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe." Lincoln was assassinated 5 months later. Greenbacks were phased out, and the banks made sure no president could do that again. The Federal Reserve Act was their solution, a system where the government would have to borrow money into existence from private banks at interest forever. Here's how the Federal Reserve creates money, step by step. The actual mechanism. Step 1. The government needs money. Congress passes a budget. $5 trillion in spending. Tax revenue, $3 trillion. Deficit, $2 trillion. The government needs $2 trillion it doesn't have. Step 2. The Treasury issues bonds. Treasury bonds are IOUs. The government promises to pay back the money with interest. They print $2 trillion worth of these bonds. Step 3. Banks buy the bonds. JP Morgan, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs. They purchase treasury bonds from the government. The government receives $2 trillion in cash. The banks now hold $2 trillion in treasury bonds. Step 4. The Federal Reserve enters. The Fed decides to buy $500 billion of those treasury bonds from the banks. The banks sell the bonds to the Federal Reserve. Now here's the critical moment. Where does the Federal Reserve get $500 billion? They don't have it. Watch what happens. A Fed employee opens the computer system. They go to JP Morgan's reserve account. They type plus $500 billion. Enter. Done. JP Morgan now has $500 billion in their reserve account. The Federal Reserve now owns $500 billion in Treasury bonds. And here's the key. That $500 billion did not exist 30 seconds earlier. No gold was moved from a vault. No assets were sold. No one made a deposit. A number was typed into a computer. Money created from nothing. So let's go back to our original question. If the Fed created that $500 billion from nothing, who do they owe it to? The answer? No one. There was no lender who gave the Fed $500 billion. The Fed simply created it. They owe nothing to anyone. But here's the paradox. Even though the Fed owes nothing, the US government owes the Fed. The Treasury issued bonds. Those bonds are debt. The government must pay back that $500 billion with interest. Currently about 3 to 4% per year. That's $15 to $20 billion in annual interest on that $500 billion. Let's think about this. The Fed created $500 billion from nothing. They owe no one for it, but the government owes them $500 billion plus interest. The government pays that interest with tax revenue. Your tax dollars. You are paying interest on money that was created from nothing, owed to no one. Now here's where the mathematics become impossible. If the Fed created $500 billion, the government owes $500 billion plus 3% interest. Total owed $515 billion. But only $500 billion was created. Where does the extra $15 billion come from? The government has to borrow it, which means the Treasury issues more bonds, which the Fed buys by creating more money, which creates more debt, which requires more interest, which requires more borrowing. The cycle is infinite. And here's the part that should terrify you. The debt can never be repaid. If the government paid back every dollar of the national debt, it would return all the money to the Federal Reserve. But every dollar in existence was created when the Fed bought government bonds. If all the bonds are paid back, all the dollars disappear. Zero money supply. The system mathematically requires permanent, expanding debt. It's not a flaw, it's the design. Now let's look at where this has taken us. When the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the national debt was $2.9 billion. Today, $36 trillion. That's a 12,414x increase. In 1913, the dollar was backed by gold. You could exchange dollars for gold at a fixed rate. In 1971, Nixon ended that. The dollar became backed by nothing. Just the government's promise to pay debt with more debt. The current numbers: national debt, $36 trillion. Annual interest payments, $1.1 trillion, 2024. That's more than the defense budget, more than Medicare. Your tax dollars paying interest on money created from nothing. And it's accelerating. In 2020, the debt was $27 trillion. 4 years later, $36 trillion. That's $9 trillion added in 4 years. The Federal Reserve created $5 trillion of that through money creation. The parallels to Rome aren't similar. They're exact. Rome's debt currency spiral, 200 to 400 AD. The empire spent more than tax revenue. They borrowed from wealthy Romans and foreign creditors. To pay the debt, they debased the currency, reduced silver content in coins. More coins, less silver. More currency, same value of goods. Prices rose, interest payments grew. They debased further, prices rose more. The cycle accelerated until the denarius, once pure silver, was 95% worthless metal. America's debt currency spiral, 1913 to 2024. The government spends more than tax revenue. They borrow from the Federal Reserve and of foreign creditors. To manage the debt, the Fed creates money digitally. More dollars, no backing. More currency, same value of goods. Prices rise, interest payments grow. They create more money, prices rise more. The cycle is accelerating. The mechanism is identical. Rome debased the denarius from 100% silver, 64 AD to 5% silver, 265 AD. That's 200 years. America went from gold-backed dollar, 1913, to unlimited digital creation, 2020. That's 107 years. The timeline is compressed, but the mathematics are the same. Rome's result, by 301 AD, prices had increased 50 times. Soldiers refused payment in debased coins. They demanded gold. Emperor Diocletian tried price controls. It failed catastrophically. Merchants stopped selling. Shortages erupted. The empire collapsed 175 years later. America's trajectory: since 2000, prices have increased 2.5 times, officially. Real purchasing power decline is much higher. Politicians propose price controls, rent caps, price gouging laws, drug price limits. History shows this will fail. You cannot legislate away the consequences of currency debasement. Let's identify the pattern, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every empire that adopted a debt-based currency system followed the same sequence. Stage 1. Currency control. A central authority gains power to create or control money. Rome. Emperors controlled the imperial mints. Britain. Bank of England chartered 1694. America. Federal Reserve established 1913. Stage 2. Deficit spending. The government spends beyond tax revenue. Wars, infrastructure, welfare, costs exceed income. Borrowing begins. Rome. Endless frontier wars in Germania, Parthia, Britannia. Britain. Global empire maintenance, Napoleonic wars. America. Global military presence, entitlement programs, endless wars. Stage 3. Debt accumulation. Borrowing becomes structural, permanent. The debt grows faster than the economy. Rome debt to wealthy elites, foreign kings. Britain. National debt never repaid after 1694. America, $36 trillion, growing $2 trillion annually. Stage 4. Currency debasement. To manage the debt, they debase the currency. Rome. Silver content reduced from 100% to 5%. Britain. Left gold standard 1931. America. Left gold standard 1971. Unlimited creation since 2008. Stage 5. Inflation, more currency units, same amount of goods. Prices rise. Wages don't keep up. Standard of living declines. Rome. 50 times price increase over 100 years. Britain. 25% inflation in the 1970s. America, 20% plus since 2020, official, much higher in reality. Stage 6. Loss of confidence. People stop trusting the currency. They seek alternatives. Rome. Soldiers demanded gold instead of debased coins. Britain. World abandoned pound for dollar. 1940s to 1950s. America. BRICS nations building dollar alternatives. Central banks reducing dollar reserves. Stage 7. Collapse or reset. Currency fails or loses dominance. Empire contracts. New system emerges. Rome. Currency worthless by 400 AD. Empire collapse 476 AD. Britain. Lost reserve currency status 1944, empire dissolved by 1960. America, currently stage 5, moving towards stage 6. This pattern has repeated 3 times over 2,000 years. No exceptions. We are in stage 5 right now. Here's the evidence. Currency debasement. Federal Reserve balance sheet grew from $900 billion, 2008, to $7.4 trillion, 2024. Inflation. Official CPI shows 20% cumulative since 2020. Real inflation in housing, food, energy, much higher. Loss of confidence beginning. BRICS nations, 41% of global population, creating alternative payment systems. China and Saudi Arabia discussing oil sales in yuan, not dollars. Central bank dollar reserves declining from 73%, 2001, to 58%, 2024. Gold purchases by central banks at highest level in 50 years. Every empire that reached stage 5 moved to stage 6 within 10 to 20 years. Every single one. The pattern is absolute. So let's go back to the original question. If the Fed creates money from nothing, who do they owe it to? No one. The Federal Reserve owes nothing, but you, the taxpayer, owe them. Your government borrowed money that didn't exist until the moment it was lent, and you pay interest on it. $1.1 trillion this year alone. That's $3,000 per American. Every year, just in interest on money created from nothing. Here's what this means for you. First, your dollars are losing value by design. This isn't accidental inflation. It's the mathematical consequence of creating currency to pay debt that can never be repaid. Second, your wages will never keep up. When the money supply increases 40% in 4 years, but your salary increases 10%, you're losing purchasing power. This is a wealth transfer from you to those who create the money first. Third, this system has an expiration date. No debt-based fiat currency has survived long-term. Rome's lasted 200 years. Britain's pound lost reserve status after 250 years. The dollar has been pure fiat, no gold backing, for 53 years. We're ahead of schedule for stage 6. Fourth, pattern recognition is your advantage. When Rome's currency collapsed, 2 groups emerged. Those who held debased coins lost everything. Those who held real assets, land, gold, goods, survived. When Britain's pound collapsed, those who stayed in pounds lost 30% of value in a decade. Those who diversified preserved wealth. The pattern rewards preparation. This isn't financial advice, this is historical pattern. This Federal Reserve debt mechanism is one piece of a larger pattern. We've covered military overextension, how America maintains 750 bases in 80 countries while the debt grows. We've covered the derivatives market, $600 trillion in financial weapons that nearly destroyed everything in 2008. The Federal Reserve's money creation system accelerates all of it. It funds the unsustainable military. It enables the derivatives bubble. It creates the inflation that destroys savings. It's the engine of empire collapse. The pattern has repeated 4 times: Rome, Spain, Britain, America. Every time, those in power believed they were different, that their financial innovation had solved the old problems, that the rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong. Every time. Because you cannot create wealth by creating currency. You cannot borrow your way to prosperity. And you cannot pay interest on infinite debt forever. The mathematics are absolute. The pattern is unforgiving. If this changed how you see money, subscribe. Next week, the $600 trillion derivatives market and how the same banks that own the Fed created a financial weapon that makes 2008 look like a dress rehearsal. The pattern is clear. The answer to who does the Fed owe is no one, but the answer to who owes the Fed is you. Every taxpayer, every dollar holder. Understanding that is the first step to seeing the full pattern. Comment below. Did you know the Fed was privately owned? What surprised you most? I'll see you in the next one.